Welcome everyone, Questini here with the discussion about start positions for the Chaos Dwarves in Total War Warhammer 3, both Immortal Empires and Realms of Chaos. Of course, we have seen the start positions for all of the Legendary Lords of the Chaos Dwarves in Realms of Chaos, courtesy of the campaign previews that Creative Assembly has done. But we now have information, courtesy of some maps that we have been given, about where these guys will start in Immortal Empires. And I gotta tell you, it looks like it's gonna be a wild ride. But first off, let's have a word from our sponsor, Grimgor Ironhand.
Grimgor Ironhand would like to protest Creative Assembly's recent decisions with regards to the Chaos Dwarves. While His Excellency very much welcomes the addition of greater fights on the horizon, as opposed to the dull situation he finds himself in, he still feels obliged to speak out for his fellow Greenskins. Already the Greenskins are assailed on all sides, forced to contend with numerous foes all over the world, and Grimgor was already carrying the weight of his race on his shoulders, as all other Greenskins end up being killed by their numerous foes. Now, with not only one but two legendary lords near him, he fears that it will become impossible for any Greenskin empire to rise. This situation should not be allowed to stand. Grimgor calls all able-bodied people to vote for him in the coming election, so that this historic injustice against the Greenskin race be remedied. Vote Green, vote for Grimgor.
Did that mad green orc really write all that? Can he even write? I'd find it easier to believe that the dwarves have decided to put aside all their grudges and turn to pacifism.
It was mostly mad, incoherent shouting, proclaiming he would assemble a great army, march on the Chaos Dwarves and tear down their walls, and that once he was done, he would march on London. As if I had my scholars compose a message for the public.
So of course, one of the main factors in any Chaos Dwarf campaign, but especially Astragoth Ironhand, is going to be Grimgor. This is going to apply to both Realms of Chaos and Immortal Empires. Grimgor is a powerhouse currently in the game, but he's a powerhouse because he has no real opponents with the exception of Kolic. Outside of that, none of the factions here can stand up to him, either when you control him or when the AI controls him. And that's the reason why Grimgor is such a nightmare in every campaign, because he builds a vast empire across a huge territory in the Mountains of Morn, and by the time you encounter him, unless you're playing as Kolic, he's basically become as unstoppable as any AI faction can be. And if you're playing as Grimgor, you are unstoppable. Now, of course, that is going to change, but we don't really know what's going to happen in his campaign. What I would say is that if you are planning on playing on Grimgor, it might be worth ignoring any Chaos Dwarf to the west, because you do have the capital over here in Saber Mountain. Instead, playing your campaign as normal, dealing with Kolic, expanding over here, and then dealing with Zaytan over here in the Valerie and the Granite Spikes, where he's going to start in. That would probably be the best decision. And it would also be interesting to see how powerful his AI will be in Realms of Chaos, because non-controlled characters, non-controlled factions in a campaign are less powerful than when the player can control. So basically, if you can play a Legendary Lord in a campaign and you don't, then their AI has a bunch of benefits. If you can't play them, and you can't play Grimgor obviously in Realms of Chaos, then they don't have those benefits. So we'll see how all of that develops, if he is a genuine threat in Realms of Chaos, as he currently is in Immortal Empires, and what that means for the Chaos Dwarves. So talking about Astragoth Ironhand, in both Immortal Empires and Realms of Chaos, he is going to start in Zorn Uskul, in Uskulak, in both campaigns. Now, let's talk about the Immortal Empire situation. Uskulak is a strategic choke point in Immortal Empires between the Northern Chaos Wastes and the Darklands. And you do have some opportunities, but of course you've got the big bad green boy over here to the east. Now, we don't know how they're going to change the province over here in Immortal Empires. They might add another region over here to reduce the travel time. In fact, that might be the case for all of the Darklands. They could really use some more settlements. I can't believe I'm necessarily saying that, but the distances here in the Darklands are just too great between settlements, which makes it a very unappealing part of the campaign map. Also worth saying that the Chaos Dwarves apparently do have a lot of terrain types that they can sell without any issues. It's probably because they're a Chaos faction, and Chaos does have that particular advantage. gee, Creative Assembly, can you give Chaos even more benefits in their campaigns? Because settlement types, terrain types are actually a significant benefit in any particular campaign. So what are you going to do as Astragoth? Well, I am going to assume that you're going to start a war with the Slaves of Tsar. Fair enough. It seems like a fairly reasonable assumption. Or maybe, who knows, maybe we'll have the Darkland Orcs over here, transferring between control and provinces. But likely, we're going to have the Slaves of Tsar controlling these two settlements if there isn't a third settlement added here, a third minor settlement added here in the campaign. And you can probably deal with them. And if you're a very, very aggressive player, and potentially using your laborers to construct buildings instantly and then getting some higher tier units, you might actually just decide, you know what, screw it, let's go for Grimgor. Let's take him out very, very quickly, besiege his capital, take him out, because if you adopt that kind of stance, you might just have the ability of taking Saber Mountain. And if you manage to take Saber Mountain, even if you can't necessarily hold it against Grimgor's counterattack, and you might be forced to a draw, you are neutering his campaign potential over here by removing his unit recruitment. Though, of course, he only starts with tier 1 settlement, but if the AI is controlling him on Legendary very hard, he's going to get this to tier 2 and tier 3 very, very quickly. So removing his unit recruitment capacity for the barracks is actually one of the best things you could do as Astragoth. Of course, you could also adopt a different mentality, which is to not bother with this province at all. You have a provincial capital. Even if you start at war with these Slaves of Tsar, and you're likely going to, then you could just decide, okay, I'm going to defeat whatever army is on the field, and then march north, recruit some units, and go deal with the Skaven over here. Because Chaos Dwarves are Chaos, and you can imagine that other Chaos factions are going to be friends with you. And you do have a pretty decent starting province over here, assuming your diplomatic relations with Chaos factions and Norskins aren't too bad. And the opportunity here, this is a pretty good province. It's got 4 regions, and you just march over here, take Tribe Slaughter, take this mountain. This will actually increase your relations with Archaon, though you kind of have to race for it because Archaon is going to destroy this Slaaneshi faction. So you take this out, then you march back here, dealing with Clan Ferric, who starts over here in Carrick Dum. But we don't know what kind of changes Creative Assembly, if any, they're going to make over here. But if you want a safer campaign start, that might be the better decision when it comes down to it. As opposed to marching over here and having that fight with Grimgor. It would be the worst decision in the world to fight over this province and then to lose it to Grimgor in the early game. So if you're going to take control of Zorna's Skull, you have to accept the fact that you're going to have to deal with Grimgor. I imagine diplomatic relations between Grimgor and the Chaos Dwarves are going to be very poor, as they should be given everything that's happened between Grimgor and the Chaos Dwarves. Basically, he is Greenskin Spartacus. He led a rebellion, or he was a major part of a rebellion, where the Black Orcs escaped from the control of the Chaos Dwarves. So it makes sense that he would not like them. Now, if you've dealt with Grimgor and also taken over this entire province, you shouldn't worry too much about defending this province because there's only a minor faction of Kislev over here that might be an issue, and they're going to have other issues to deal with between Fronta and Clean. Eventually, Catherine might become an issue, but I wouldn't concern myself too much about it. Though you could take the entire province for yourself if you can make deals with the Chaos factions and really put pressure on Kislev. Though bear in mind, going against Kislev might not necessarily be your best idea, but if you can push into Kislev, and this is one of the advantages, if you can push into Kislev, take Prague, take their settlements, you can get into the Empire. And if you can get into the Empire, then there's a lot of opportunities of expansion there, assuming you have the terrain types available in your campaign. If you do, and you have good relations with the Chaos factions, there's an enormous number of opportunities by adopting this plan, even though the early game fights against Kislev can actually be pretty brutal. Because Kislev, when controlled by the AI, yes, they can be rolled over if you're playing Azazel. As Fraught or other factions, it can become something of an issue. Unless you bring overwhelming numbers. We'll see how that handles, how the Chaos Dwarf economy is, how many armies they can afford, how good those armies are. I will not base anything on the preview trailers when it comes to that. Those are demonstration videos. They're not really reflective of pretty much anything as far as I'm concerned when it comes to like how many armies you can afford, how fast you can expand or anything like that. Anyway, so So if you can move into the Empire and colonize it, and maybe make some deals with Festus, then this is where the heart of your Empire can be. Of course, you do have Draca and Azag, but the thing is, by the time you arrive here, Draca and Azag should have weakened themselves against each other and wiped themselves out. That is one campaign plan. The alternative is, of course, taking the northern mountains of Morn, expanding over here, expanding the Darklands, getting better relations with the Cast Dwarves. But that does require you to deal with Grimgor. But there are certainly opportunities over here, though it depends on how spread out the settlements are. If they're as spread out as they are right now, I would say it's not worth it. You're going to waste too much time in your campaign. If they're closer together, then sure, there's a much better situation over here when it comes to your campaign potential. But I would personally avoid the Darklands for another reason. There's, of course, Stretch, Craventail, Emmerich, and other factions down here in the south. So maybe going into Kislev and in the Empire would be your better decision. At least taking Tribe Slaughter, taking the Skull Road would be worth it, assuming you can deal with the terrain types. Then we get to Realms of Chaos. Now in Realms of Chaos, we saw his starting position. He's going to start with Uskolak. I actually assumed based on the preview that he would also start with the Falls of Doom, but hopefully he starts like say about here, and his first field battle is going to be here, so he can take the Falls of Doom on turn 1 and then turn around and take the fort over here very quickly and get control over this entire province. It's the same province, just has 4 regions as opposed to 3, as it does in Immortal Empires. But I guess we will see how that develops. Now, after this, there are some choices you can make in your campaign. The choice that Creative Assembly made during the campaign preview is that they took the High Pass, which is controlled by Skaven, then took the World Edge Mountains and took out the Red Eye Greenskins. But of course, that is not necessarily the best decision in the world for a number of reasons. One of those reasons is, of course, you've got Karakadrin here. Now, Ungarum, of course, as a legendary lord that can't be controlled in Realms of Chaos, is not going to be as powerful as he is in Immortal Empires. But the problem I would see with this situation is twofold. One, if you fight these Greenskins, you're leaving yourself vulnerable to Kislev, and you can be certain that Katrin is going to be right on the border with you. Though she's also going to have her own issues, though generally speaking, on Legend very hard, she does overcome those issues. But between Valkia, the Norskins, Kalan Mulder, she might not attack you instantly if you move very quickly. Hell, you might even avoid fighting the Skaven and actually decide, you know what, let's take the Silver Pinnacle first and deal with the Skaven later. Now, High Pass is a good province, don't get me wrong on this. It's got 4 regions, it has potential. But the World Edge Mountains, it's a bit of a different situation when it comes to your expansion plan. And you probably will want to deal with Karakadrin. But basically, if you're taking the World's Edge Mountains, you can expect to have to deal with Karakadrin, and you can expect to have to deal with Karakadrin. So it might be an idea, to some extent, to take the High Pass and then just march on the Peak Pass, and maybe make a deal with the vampires if that's possible, or maybe wipe out the Greenskins for them, make a deal with them, turn them in allies, and then you take Peak Pass for yourself, or move down south here. Now, these provinces over here on the side of the map are going to be changed, but if you want to pick a fight to Craventel for this section of the campaign map, that might work. The benefit here, of course, is you're taking a part of the map where opponents are going to come from other sides, because you're going to have fellow Cast Dwarves over here in the middle. Zaytan is also going to be in the middle. So if you can march and take over the entire coastline over here, or a portion of the map over here, that might really work very well for your campaign. And then if you march into Sylvania from Blackwater, without having to bother from Karakadrin actually, and then maybe also taking Blackwater, that might be a good decision on your part. So start from the north, march your way down south here, though of course there is some time wasted. If you're going to capture the High Pass, it's in your best interest to start with this settlement, though just bear in mind the Skaven do have a tendency. I've played Boris Ursus' campaign over here, so I know how the Skaven behave. If you start capturing from here, then the Skaven are going to march on the settlement and be a nuisance. Now, the wild card is, of course, the vampires and how they behave towards you diplomatically, because they also have this tendency, so you might have to start building a secondary army while your main army is marching to take the High Pass and then turning south around to take the Silver Pinnacle, take the Sidar Province, and then go deal with Ungor of Iron Fist, and hopefully not having to deal with Catherine. You can, of course, expand into Kislev, take Kislev, but the real gem of provinces here in Realms of Chaos in this part of the world is Castle Drakenhof because of the gold mine. We actually haven't seen how Chaos Dwarves handle trade resources, really. I mean, what structures they have, how important it is, how much income they can generate, and how important that income can be in their campaign. But for virtually everyone else, Castle Drakenhof taking that can be very, very significant. And then, of course, marching on the southern part of the Empire in a very, very safe location, taking territory as you go. Quite a few opportunities, but of course you do have the ticking time bombs over here as well, because Grimgor is going to be added in Realms of Chaos. We have seen that in the campaign previews. Like, we saw his icon on the map. We haven't actually seen him in any footage, but we did see his faction icon. So you might actually have to deal with Grimgor in the Mountains of Morn. Though I am going to say it as plainly as possible, the Mountains of Morn are not a great part of the campaign map for any faction in Realms of Chaos. Now, the Saberskin and other factions around here can be an issue, but you do have Kugaf who's going to wipe them out. And not just Kugaf, by the way. But it depends on your relations with fellow Chaos factions and how those are going to play out. But you do have Valkia over here. She should provide some buffer. Maybe establishing good diplomatic relations with Valkia would actually be the play in the campaign to secure your northern flank and help you out, if you can actually manage to achieve that. Actually, this is Saber Mountain in Realms of Chaos. If Grimgor starts there, ooh, that is a problem for you, because that puts your capital under threat. But we will see how that plays out. Though I have to say that he didn't seem to start here. He didn't seem to be here on the campaign footage they showed in Astragoth's campaign preview. So going into the Empire, going all the way to Sylvania, though of course bear in mind with such an exposed Empire that the factions that hate you, like Catherine and others, can obviously take advantage of that. You could go into the Mountains of Morn for all the problems it has in terms of navigation, though you do have the underway to help you with that. But for all the problems it has, it might provide you some other opportunities as well, especially if you can expand into Cathay. Because one shouldn't ignore the fact that Cathay is a very great part of the campaign map, especially if you can be friends with the Chaos factions. So there are some possibilities, though. I actually think the path they chose on the campaign preview, while they didn't necessarily do it in the way I would, I think it was the correct decision in taking the High Pass, because it is right next to you, and the Skaven aren't necessarily the friendliest of neighbors in any campaign. Anyway, that is all. Christine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.